when I gave my first TU presentation in, I think it was 2000 or 2001 at the Roosevelt. And it was this sort of premise. It was on hatches. And in recent years, when I've been invited, we kind of went down some different routes because I felt we'd kind of beat this one pretty hard. But every year out there, new things really, I pick up new things about what's happening with the hatches. And it's less that the hatches change, and it's more that we learn how to really capitalize on them. And new techniques, new thought processes and approaches. Those are both pictures of me and my dad as when I was a kid, and probably right about where things went wrong. He's teaching me to cast a Zebco in that right picture. But he'd come home from Bell Rapids. I grew up down in Wendell, and back then carp hadn't gotten into the Snake. Somebody had the brilliance of putting a hatchery raceway at the base of the Washington Monument and filling it with carp. I forget who it was, but this was what biology looked like in the early days of our country. We did some really foolish things, and now carp have single-handedly destroyed a lot of the trout water I grew up on. The Snake River down by Hagerman was trout water. That was really amazing water. We used to catch big browns, big rainbows out of there. But those are a couple of big rainbows. Back then, this was pre-Roderick Hegg Brown catch and release ethic, period. If you even talked about catch and release, people thought you were sniffing glue. Why would you spend that kind of money to catch fish to turn around and let them go? I got into this very backwards. I discovered we were having a yard sale when I was 8 years old, and there was this cool metal tackle box that my parents were selling, and it's worth noting they were taxidermists. They were bird taxidermists through the late 60s, 70s, and up until the time the farming practices changed in the mid 80s and wiped out the pheasant populations. Burning the ditches flush to the ground for increased flow, or burning the ditches, cutting the corn flush to the ground, removing rock outcroppings, and going to center pivot and not replacing any of that with CRP and not really taking conservation measures. So my parents got out of the taxidermy game in about 1985, but my dad knew enough about tying flies. He knew which way to wrap his thread, and he could do some of the basics. And I discovered this little fly tying kit with a Thompson A-vise in it and a bunch of chucker and pheasant feathers and furs and things, and I was really curious. And my dad taught me how to tie flies. And my way I learned, I would just look at books and look at pictures. Well, the prettiest flies I could find were classic Atlantic salmon flies. So before I was 10 years old, I was doing married wing flies, and by the time I was 13, was traveling all over the West to take clinics from Michael Radencinch and some of the really kind of legendary guys. So through fly fishing and fly tying, I found a way to combine all of my favorite things: fish, art, and bugs. It all just fit together with this sport. And that was a wedding cake topper I did for Riley and Caitlin Berman for their wedding a few years ago. Horrible picture, but you can go really crazy wanting to know as much as you want to learn about bugs. This is how crazy I've gone. This is a 55-gallon biotope aquarium in my apartment that I rear aquatic insects in. You've done some really, I've learned more with this thing than I could have learned in 50 years trying to figure it out from a terrestrial standpoint on the river. When all the UV stuff started coming out and people talking about how bugs are reflecting UV light as they're emerging, and trout see ultraviolet, I wanted to know which bugs and in what stages. So by popping them in this thing, and when the emergence cycles would start to begin, I try and capture the bugs when they were in their last instars, when they were very close to emergence. And we know that just based on the hatch calendars around here. Then they didn't have to survive too long in the aquarium. They just had to complete that last instar. And then when I'd see that they were emerging, I'd kill the lights and hit it with a UV light. And that was one of the first things I learned was you bet bugs reflect UV, and especially right when they're emerging, they get all that gas buildup, some more than others. Where the real challenge fell is my dream was to put a camera on it. But if any of you have worked in macro, you know that your field of view is about that narrow, and when you're trying to hit a moving target that's about that big as it's emerging. So that's the next puzzle, is figuring out how do I capture this so we can show you guys right here real time what these bugs are looking like as they're hatching. But that's just to kind of give you a little background on me and how crazy I've gotten with trying to understand. I don't get enough river by working 100 days straight in the summer. I've got to have one in my own home. So. Fly fishing has taken on a whole new look in recent years. Some of the flies we're fishing with, you kind of question whether that's really a fly or is that a lure. When I got into it, there was still a huge pushback against any synthetics. If you were tying with something that wasn't real feathers and fur, there were guys saying, you shouldn't do that, that's not a fly. Well, now we're asking whether it's a fly if it has more than 2 hooks and it's longer than that. The world's changed. But it doesn't change the fact that the premise of our sport, it's called fly fishing. It was built on bugs and the relationship that these fish have with them. That's kind of a fun picture I just snapped on the Big Wood one day. I was guiding and we were releasing a fish, and the rock right there underwater in front of us was just covered with those caddis. And I mean, the Big Wood River, the bottom of that river is just insane. It's covered with stuff. Really amazing. This was just a hatch chart that I pulled offline for the Boise River, and I know some of you may not be able to read that very well, but the next slides following it will kind of give a little more detail about what we're seeing here. If you look at what hatches on the South Fork of the Boise, it almost all is what we see right here. There are a few things that we don't see on here that we do get locally, but for the most part, it's all pretty much there. They're missing hecuba, which is our big red quill in September on the wood. They're missing a few of those things, but we'll kind of, and damselflies, one of my personal favorites, and calabatus are missing from the Boise. 3 of my all-time favorite hatches, but we'll fill in the gaps with that as we move on. Something to really take note of is look where all the hatches start. It's right at the tail end of spring runoff. To be a dry fly purist is a lonely game. The best hatches really don't happen most of the time. You get out there and you're seeing green drakes, yellow sallies, golden stones, flabs, PMDs, all going at once. That's right at the tail end of spring runoff. And as a lot of us know, I'm not getting any younger. That time is not an easy time to get around rivers. The rivers are still a little high. They're cranking. And we're going to talk about what it is that's triggering those hatches and why we're seeing them just boom, all of a sudden. And then by August, go fish calabatus on the creek. There's just not much happening in terms of hatches in August in the Rocky Mountain West, in this desert area. There are some little things we see, some pink alberts, some trickling off PMDs, and we'll talk about that as we move forward. But I thought that hatch chart just sort of, you look at all these hatch charts and it's like, well, everything starts at the same time. And most of it's over by August for the most part, at least in its dense numbers, those concentrated, really spectacular hatches that we see. Synchronized is a good word for it. This is where the rubber meets the road. It's the water temp that's triggering all these hatches and why we can set our clock by them. Midges at 42, then followed by calabatus. 45 is baetis, and calabatus both have a similar hatch start. We don't think of calabatus as starting until sometime in June. Well, we can't fish the creek before that. If you ever go and float it in a canoe, you'll see some really amazing things in April, May. You'll see some of the most intense chartreuse PMDs, the color of his shirt that he's wearing under that coat. I've never seen a PMD that looks like the PMDs that hatch when it's too early to fish for them. Go down and fish it. But there's also some calabatus that trickle off. There's 5 subspecies of calabatus now they've categorized. And so when we think of calabatus, we don't want to think of that as just one bug that's hatching all year. PMD is the same thing. Ephemeral inermis and ephemeral infrequens. And without fail, the biggest ones hatch first. And by August, you're dealing with the smallest ones. Another reason August is a good time to stay at home and drink an Arnie Palmer or something. And then caddis. And what I've listed here, these are sort of the spring hatches we can expect. If anybody's been fortunate enough since this new regulation change on Silver Creek to see the Betas hatches in March on the lower creek. Why is everybody talking about brown drakes? This thing is unreal. It's a mat of bugs covering the surface. The difference is, I think fish have learned to migrate into a stretch that's become, it's not really great trout habitat anymore. It's so silted in that lower end of the creek that virtually all those fish that we're catching during brown drakes are gone by mid-July. They've moved up into the preserve. Now with the fish passage on the dam at the bottom of Kilpatrick Pond, they can move freely throughout that whole system and do. Greg Loomis has done some remarkable tagging work down there, and we're finding fish tags show up in really weird places, like pelican poop in Murtaugh is one of the weird places we're finding the tags. But we're seeing fish being caught a long ways from where they were tagged, and some of them being caught right where they were tagged. That the conditions hadn't forced them to change, no environmental reason for them to, they hadn't gone and left to spawn. But if you haven't seen it, go down, drive down to the Peekaboo store and just go right back behind the store to the bridge there in March when the water temperatures start to warm and you're looking for that kind of 45-degree hit and a nice day, generally a nice day, maybe a little cloudy warm, and you'll see Betas like nothing I've ever seen. There aren't the number of fish in there potted up eating them that you see during brown drakes, and I think that has to do with the migration that those fish have been doing for years because they know what's about to happen when the brown drake happens. I don't talk about brown drakes because I coined it 25 years ago as the world's second largest outdoor cocktail party next to the Georgia-Florida game. I haven't been there in 25 years. I missed what brown drakes used to be, where if there was somebody within 100 yards of you, you felt crowded. Now I won't fish it. I think it's ridiculous. Combat fishing. Leave that for Alaska. Caddis, even though I listed this as spring, the reason I put that there is if you venture outside of some of our real local adjacent waters, you go down to the Malad, right where it dumps into the Snake there and fish some of that, you'll see caddis hatches right now. On warm days, that's the banana belt down there. But I've gone down and experienced some really fun evening caddis on that river. I haven't fished it in many years. I don't know what the quality of trout are really looking like in there. But there used to be some. It fished a lot like the Big Wood up here in terms of its size and sort of what you saw in there. They were 12 to 16. If you caught an 18-incher, man, you were stoked. It was really cool. Not really big fish. Now as we move towards summer, and we're kind of going right in a timeline from top to bottom, salmon flies, as soon as water temperature consistently hits about the 50s, mid-50s, salmon fly starts. Then right on the heels of that, your golden stones and your green drakes, and oftentimes overlapping with. If any of you have been fortunate, I'm sure a lot of people in this room have been up on the Big Lost, depending on when spring runoff, how early a warm up we have, anywhere from mid-June to mid-July, when the river first gets wadeable, and every bug in that river is coming off, and the fish don't care which one you tie on. They're gonna eat. It's remarkable. That upper, and we're gonna talk more about that upper Lost, because there are some things that I've noticed up there that I kind of want to share with you guys and get maybe some feedback from some of you all that I run into regularly and see if you're seeing something similar. I've got a theory on the places I pick to fish when I go to the upper Lost and why I pick them. We'll talk about that in just a minute. At least for hatches, when I'm really wanting to capitalize on hatches. Maybe I've got somebody that just wants to fish dry fly that day. There's very specific water that the hatches seem to go off the most dense in. Not below the dam, talking upper water. And then PMD and Pink Albert kind of fall last with all of this. Daily peak around 60 degrees, which makes sense. Those are the hatches that we do see continue into August, especially Pink Albert. PMD, they tend to kind of go off July on the Big Wood, the Big Lost, the Salmon River. And by August, I'm not seeing very many PMDs, at least not enough to get the fish really looking up. Pink Alberts seem to be that heat of summer surprise. We don't see them every day out there, but when you see something that looks like a PMD, but it's a little more orange, the old timers used to call it, the Latin name's Epioris albertae. They either called it a Pink Albert or a pink lady because only the females are pink. The others kind of have more of this almost like a PMD color, and I think it's why even I get them confused with PMDs all the time. Without getting them under a stereoscope, the fish don't know. Anyway, then ending our spring, summer, fall season, Hecuba, of course, the red quill, my personal favorite because, well, enough people have gone back to California that we have some river to ourselves. And I think when you're fishing these searching big patterns that trickle off all day, it's not a trico hatch. It doesn't happen all at once in a half an hour to an hour. It happens slowly over the course of the day, just bugs trickling off. And when you get those kind of hatches, you need to be able to cover water. You don't just go sit on a pod as much and have the same kind of luck. I need to be able to cover water, so I think that hatch is a perfect September hatch. It goes for most of the month of September. I've even seen a few of them still lingering into October if it stays warm, our beautiful Indian summers we have here. Then as the temperatures continue to cool down, the BWOs come right back. So you see where we're going. We're ending where we started the season. We're ending with the same bugs, the midges and the betas, or BWO varieties, that start our season. And by the way, I'm assuming most people in this room know all these BWO, PMD, pale morning dun, blue-winged olive. If anybody is confused by any terms I use, please stop me at any time. And then midges will overlap with BWO, but even after the BWO starts, they'll hatch any day of the year as long as you get water temperatures reaching 42 degrees. I say that, but when I get my dry fly people wanting to book trips, I say don't book December and January. Because odds are it's not going to hit 42 degrees, and we all know that if we want to experience even a few fish maybe slurping midges, wait till now, and especially wait till March. There's no reason to pay good money for a guide expecting a certain thing that's just not going to happen. I'm always very transparent about when the good timings are, and then there's no guarantees, but hopefully if we play our cards right. So before we talk about, I want to go into specifics on some of the specific mayfly species a little deeper. But before we do, let's step back to what I mentioned about the Big Lost. There's a lot of foliage differences as you move from, say, Bartlett Point, Garden Creek area up into the headwaters, whether it be Star Hope, Upper North Fork. It goes from being a lot of cottonwoods mixed with willows, even aspen varieties besides cottonwood, and a really important one, alders. Watch where the alders are on the Lost. I don't know, I can't tell you a scientific reason, but it's one of a couple of factors. There used to be an entomologist with one of the universities in Texas that could walk any river in the West, and if he knew what elevation that river was, he'd identify the trees and foliage growing along the river, and he'd know exactly what insects should exist in that water, because they all feed on detritus, broken down plant matter, except a few of the predatory bugs, your odominid, dragonflies and damselflies. All the others are cleaning the river. They're eating all that broken down plant matter. So there's either something about alder leaves and broken down plant matter off alder that is feeding a bigger biodiversity of aquatic insects, particularly green drakes, yellow sallies, or golden stones, and or those trees, when the wind blows Mach 10, they don't lay over like a willow does. They give more protection for copulation flights. So it's either one of those factors or both, but you can, without fail, if I know I want to see the biggest hatches I'm going to see on the big lost of that year, I go to one of my spots that's an alder tunnel, where the river is in like an alder tunnel. And there's a handful of those. There's a bunch of them down by Garden Creek. There's some on the East Fork. But if you know and you start kind of learning, don't ask me to identify an alder. I've got my friend Brett Wilson, who's an arborist by trade, who's kind of helped me identify these plants, where I'm like, what is that and why is... So something to think about for those earlier season lost hatches. If you want to see the most spectacular hatches you've ever seen, look for the stretches with alders. That took me 25 years to figure out, and there's something really to it. Let's talk drakes for a minute, because hell, we can all see them. They're one of my favorite bugs, because I don't lose track of it on the water. Brown drake, let's skip that. Green drake. End of June through July, and it occurs on all freestones here. I think a lot of us get in the mindset it just happens on the wood. It happens on the upper lost, and it happens really well on the salmon river, right when the golden stones and salmon flies are hatching. And there's a great big caddis that goes off with it. So you throw anything kind of meaty, and those big cutthroat up, they'll go for them. And it's the only time, I don't talk much about the B word, it's the only time I'll see a bull trout eat something off the top. Is right after spring runoff, when there's food that big in the form of salmon flies on top. Bull trout will come up for those, and big ones. I was up there one day with Ewald, if any of you guys know Ewald Graber, and his wife Kelly, and we were all party floating in different boats. Kelly and I both landed the biggest bull trout of our lives that day. Mine was on a streamer, no surprise, because that's what we think they eat. Hers was even bigger. It was over 10 pounds, and it was on a salmon fly pattern. It was insane. Flags, something a lot of people aren't talking about up here. I kind of categorize it with drakes, because it's bigger than any of the other mayflies we get that aren't a drake. Little smaller than your green drakes, brown drakes, and hecubas, but right in that size, probably size 12, maybe a fat 14. Big lost, I see these guys just randomly show up anytime July through September. So when there's not a lot of other bugs going on up there, you'll still see a few yellow sallies, lime sallies, and these kind of meaty, dark brown, slender body, but bigger mayfly than your PMDs and pink albers. And then, of course, one of my personal favorites, the hecuba, the red quill. Now, if we look at that photo, even without the iris in that photo, if you had a really good image of it, maybe on a computer, most local guides would know that that's not a bigwood green drake, and it's not a big lost green drake, and it's not a salmon river green drake. The green drakes on the creek are fatter and brighter colored. They're really green. They have a lot of intense green that we don't see quite as intensely on the other rivers. Just kind of an interesting note to take if you're going to go down there and fish those. The way we fish the green drake on the creek is much like we see on the bigwood. You don't see fish potted up for it, and you only see one and float by maybe every half an hour to an hour. But when they're happening, the fish know they're happening. Fish it like a hopper. Fish it tight to the banks, fish the riffles. When I'm fishing searching patterns on the creek, I don't just hit every inch of flat water. The fish are either going to come to the top when they've got the coverage of the bank, or they're going to come to the top because they have the coverage of a broken surface, just a riffle off the back of a cara bank. And when you kind of learn where to start putting your flies rather than just covering it all, your odds go way up, whether you're nymphing, dry fly fishing, but especially dry fly and searching dries. Fish don't want to come to the surface on the creek if they're not doing this, unless it's a calorie expenditure that's worth it and they feel very safe doing it. And we'll come back to that in a minute, because I've got a slide that touches on that here in a minute. So let's go to the mayflies in the middle, the size stuff that's more middle size, your size 14, 16, and a little bit 18 as you get into August. PMDs, every river around here, every tailwater, every freestone, and every spring creek, they have them. Kind of our universal bug. There's a reason it's probably the most talked about bug in fly fishing besides in the West, besides BWOs, those two. Callibaetis, we could do a whole talk on Callibaetis. The tricks that you can do with Callibaetis on Silver Creek, just go on and on and on, and they happen every single beautiful day down there when nothing else is happening, right in the heat of the day. So you fish the morning hatch, go get an early lunch, and come back for the afternoon Callibaetis spinner balls. The hatch is actually happening really early in the morning, and those of you that get there at the crack of dawn probably know this. Guys that get there to get their trichopod, they're seeing Callibaetis emergences in almost darkness in the morning. What we're seeing by and large at midday, even though you do see some emergence, but what we're seeing are those copulation flights. Whenever you see a mayfly doing that, that's the copulation flight, high line wing spinner, and so you're fishing that airplane profile on the water. And a good trick to get those airplane profile hen wing spinners, partridge wing spinners, CDC wing spinners that have no visibility, take them in your hand with the hook down and pinch really hard and just sit there and hold it and hold it and hold it. And when you let go, you should be able to drop it on a table or on the top of the water, and now it's at a 90 and one wing sticks straight up. And it fishes just the same as it did, but now you can see it. Number one trick. Number two trick, hit it with frog spanning every 3 casts, because they want those spinners on top. They don't like those things kind of sitting down in. So I frog spanning the snot out of them. I go through a bottle of frog spanning every day that I guide Silver Creek. Another little tip, don't buy frog spanning. It's a 2-part to a 2-part boat epoxy, and you can go online and order a thing like this of it that looks like you're buying drugs because it's in a brick. You fill a ketchup or mustard container with it, and the whole bag used to cost me $4. That's how much you pay for a bottle like that. One of those bags got me through the first 10 years of my guide career. 10,000 or 1,000 trips. Pink Albert, that's not one I talk a lot about, because unless you're on the Boise, it's hard to really predict. The Boise gets them a lot more predictably. On the Bigwood, Upper Lost, Salmon River, you just kind of happen to be there when it's going. And the fish aren't that picky. Throw a PMD and they'll usually eat it. If you've got really crystal clear water conditions and slow water and you have to get fancy, throw something a little more orange to pink color, kind of like the one pictured there. The little stuff that makes us pull our hair out. I put a picture there that I intentionally chose that mayfly. This is one, I love taking pictures of mayflies. I just set my phone oftentimes to its little macro, and do it. Or I used to carry, that one was with just a little Pentax Optio point and shoot that had a little macro button. That thing's about a size 30. And if anybody can tell me what that is, I'd love to know. I have no idea. I wanted to send the wing of that thing in to the guys at U of I, and I actually kept a wing off of one of them and put it under a slide, thinking I would send it off to them to find out what it is. There's more of these teeny tiny mayflies that hatch on Silver Creek that look a little bit like something else. That one looks a little bit like a trico, but there's a few giveaways. The body's way too mahogany. It's got a much more slender long body, and that's a female. You can tell by the bulbous eyes, and the egg sac isn't chartreuse, it's brown. A trico has a chartreuse egg that it lays. And there was 2 days in a row, about 10 years ago, when I was down there just walking around with the camera taking pictures of bugs, that those things were everywhere and the fish were just going bananas on them. I just pulled out a really small pale colored BWO that I had and it worked great. So knowing the Latin name doesn't matter. I still don't know what the hell that thing is. But it's tiny and it happened in August and it was a phenomenal hatch. We do get those pseudos that happen down there almost daily, and they tend to happen right on the tail of like the trico hatch. So right when your tricos are ending, you know the pseudos are egg laying when you look down and your waders are just covered. And you know which guides guided Silver Creek yesterday by looking at their waders. Their waders are covered in egg sacs, just round dots all over your waders. They've been at Silver Creek. And they were right in the middle of an epic pseudo hatch. So you might just go, hey, where were you on the creek yesterday? And then you know probably where to be today to hit an amazing pseudo hatch. Those are really interesting to fish because pseudos and a lot of these really small mayflies don't have the capability of penetrating surface tension. It'd be the equivalent of us being buried under 5 or 6 feet of dirt. Where air and water meet, the molecules are dissatisfied and it forms like a tension, a magnetic field, and the little bugs can't hardly get through it, and especially their eggs can't. If they were to just lay their eggs on the surface, their eggs would just stack up in a back eddy somewhere and probably dry out in the sun and never really make it. Most of the tiny mayflies dive below the surface to lay their eggs. So one of the most deadly ways to fish this, if you're not afraid of a fly being below the surface, dry fly guys, tie your standard dry fly body, but have a back wing that's just Zelon or something sticking back, because all they look like is a stick with their wing back, and it's really hyaline, and it kind of traps even a bubble in there a little bit. And so fishing with maybe your calabatus on top that you can see, maybe calabatus dun or a merger or something like that, and then drop about that far behind it, or a soft tackle, really small, like size 18 to 22 for your pseudos and a lot of this stuff. The reason we don't see a lot of the fish even come to the top during those spinner falls is it's not a real spinner fall. Most of the bugs are subsurface, and they're using our waders and everything on the bank to get below the surface tension, to crawl below, and then they lay their eggs all over your waders. So that should be a cue right there that spinner fall is not happening on the surface, it's happening subsurface. And it's true of most of those really teeny mayflies that happen mid to late season down there. Tricos are a little bit of an exception. They've got a fat enough body and a big enough egg sac. They just fall right on the top. This might be the most important part of this whole talk. I spent my life addicted to big mule deer, and I have a really good friend. He's a really special guy. He holds the #1 and #2 mule deer for the state of Idaho. The #1 with a bow. He's never shot anything with a rifle in his life. He only does it with a bow. The #1 was 262 inches. The #2 is 232. That tells you how much of a landslide his #1 was. That'd be like catching a new state record brown trout that was 75 pounds and the next one below it was 30 pounds. That's what that would look like. I tried for years to get in the pocket of big mule deer with short range weaponry, and it wasn't until he sat me down one evening in the pile and gave me the linear process. There's a linear process. You find that deer, you don't take it out of your sight. If he goes out of your sight, you come back the next day and try and find him in that circumference mile. You put him to bed and make sure you can see his face or his antlers, and you play the wind and you never take him out of your sight. And there's a whole set of rules, from ranging it at 200 yards, so you're not doing this at 20 yards. It's no different fishing. We're stalking a fish, and when you're casting to a riser, it's easy. I think it's the stupidest easy thing in the world, but you watch everybody make the biggest mistakes that we should know better than make. Be patient, #1. Setup is absolutely key. Don't cast that far if you can cast this far. Anyone who's thrown a horseshoe or shot a bow knows that every yard your accuracy goes down. Get close. When a fish is rising, They see in a cone off the top of their head. I've taken gals with pink ball caps on and put them this close to rising trout on the big wood and the big lost. If the river's got a broken surface, especially, you can get right in their pocket. Silver Creek, couple rod lengths away. On the big wood and most of the stuff on the lost, you could be a rod length away from most of those risers and they'll just keep rising. As long as you kind of get a little low, bearing in mind that whole cone. And refraction, that's another thing aquariums teach you. When you look into an aquarium from the side, anything sticking out of the top jogs. Well, the way refraction works for a fish is when that light hits the surface and bends back this way. Lay on the bottom of a pool. Do the people on the bank look like they're on the bank? Everything on the bank leans out over top of you when you lay on the bottom of a pool. So when that fish finally does see you, your head and your ball cap are up there and you're now an overhead predator. There's why when a fish spots you, except ones at Silver Creek that are like 10 years old, they don't even care. But fish other places, when they spot you, there's no question. You were looking at him 1 second and the next second, where'd he go? He's gone. They bolt because they think you're an overhead predator. You're way up there to them. But if you stay low, you can get so close to some of these fish and get exactly at a 90-degree angle to the current if you want the absolute best odds. If you're behind them, you're chancing lining them at any angle you're at. But when you get right here, now you can go, if the fishing setup allows you, now you can go 5, 10 feet in front of it, depending on how fast the water is, to make sure that you get in that mend or two you need so that it's drag-free and never mend on their head. If it's going by where they were, don't mend, even if it's dragging. Dragging probably won't put them down, but that tiny size 16 PMD jerking might put them down. Just stay calm on it as it goes by. And as soon as you've made a drift over them, you're not going to make another cast until that fish rises again on its own. If you cast 2 times in a row and that fish is not still doing this, you've probably already blown it. This is where the be patient comes in. It's like checking the wind when you're stalking a mule deer. After each one of these, go back and think, be patient. Then, don't cast again until the fish rises again. If he stops rising altogether, and that's a fish you really want, go fish somewhere else for a little bit. Come back. He'll forget about you. He'll probably come back as long as the availability of bugs is still there and he's in his safe zone. When you change the fly after 2 good drifts, once you've got 2 good drifts, and I swear by this, not 3, Silver Creek taught me this. If they didn't like it by the second time it drifted over them, whether it was dragging, whether the fly was too big, whether the profile was wrong, they're not going to eat it on the 3rd time. There's a reason they didn't eat it. So after you've gotten 2 good drifts, change your fly. And what this does for all of us is it forces us to be patient. If you're standing there, oh, I think he'll eat this fly, you're going to make another cast too soon. And you're going to put this fish down. Half the reason I change my guest fly is not because I've lost confidence in that fly a lot of times. It's because I need them to stop fishing to that fish long enough for that fish to rise again. When you do change a fly, I think most of us know this. There's a linear process for that. Size first, always size down. Color and profile are far less important than the size of the fly you're throwing. And especially in size 16, 18, the smaller the flies get, the more that size matters. If a salmon fly is off by 1/4 of an inch, like the ones they sell in the store, no one really notices. But if a tricho's off by 1 millimeter, we can all tell. That's not right. That's too big. So going down, sizing down is the first thing you do. Then, if I just really want that fish and I've made a cast, it looked and refused. You get a full-on refusal. Change all of the above. Change the profile, change the color, and change the size. If you didn't see an actual refusal, look and go down, just size down. And then I threw this in there because I don't think enough people know this. It's really easy to make sure you're using the right size tippet. Take your hook size, divide it by 3, and there's your general rule 5X for 14s and 16s. I'll even put 5X fluoro on 18s now. Fluorocarbon has the same refractive index as water. It's invisible. You put it, 2 flies in my aquarium, one on nylon monofilament and one on fluorocarbon, you'll see the difference right in front of you. Fluorocarbon makes a difference. And if you're a guide, your clients are worth it. Don't use nylon, especially dry fly and really technical type stuff. That was the last cutthroat of my season this year, and we did this. This was a rising fish that we had him dead to rights, but she'd never held a fly rod before in her life. She needed time to get it there and do it. We followed this set of rules. That fish ate her fly 4 different times. This happens to me almost daily on the Lost. Cutthroat. If you didn't feel that fish when you set, he didn't feel you. So when you're casting to a rising fish, especially cutthroat, throw this out the window for Silver Creek altogether. But if you're fishing the Big Wood even for rainbows, but especially the Salmon River for West Slope, the Upper Lost for Yellowstone Cutty, Snake River Fine Spotties, this absolutely applies. They eat so slow that you just whiff, and sometimes I'll even have people wait, and I'll go, did you feel him? No, I didn't feel the fish. Okay, we're not going anywhere. Just wait. They'll come back and start rising again. That fish got missed. We had the record this season. I had one fish get missed 8 times, and we just never left. We just sat there. And this goes against everything I was taught, that if you miss a fish, it's over. Not with cutthroat. It's absolutely not over. Now, if you've got somebody that's setting, like murdering it, and you're fishing a big dry fly that popped off the water like a reverse cannonball, it's over. But if you're fishing small dries and you're setting the way you should be, just that nice deliberate lift, try that next time you're on a big cutthroat that's rising on the Lost. It's really interesting. And another trick to do is just wait and see how long a fish actually holds onto your fly. Most guys can't do this. I think until you've caught enough fish to be like, I don't need to catch that fish. I want to know how long they'll hold on. Give them the old God save the queen, but do it like God save the, and half the time those cutthroats still have it in their mouth. So we're really rushing our hook sets far more than we need to. Cutthroat don't speed it up that fast. And cutties eat super, super slow. That was one of the biggest fish of my season this year. That picture's a little forced perspective, but it was 26-inch brown on a hopper. On a hopper that I didn't have the color I wanted, so I went into my pocket and got my black magic marker. These are some tips that I think make all the difference in the world. If there's no hatch happening and you just want to fish dry flies, you're not dedicated to fishing to risers, maybe there's none happening and you got to force yourself to search. Don't wait for hopper season to start fishing hoppers. It's the worst mistake everybody makes. By the time they've seen every chubby Chernobyl and every club sandwich and every Rainey's hopper out there, which doesn't take long from the time the Peekaboo Boys posted on social media, it's over. It's over. They know. And so much so, there's a tip I didn't put on there that we'll come back to. They'll come up and try and sink your fly. And if you pull it away, they know. They don't eat it. Put a split shot in front of your hoppers. If you miss a big fish, and you could tell he did this toilet flush kind of move, and then he circled looking for it, the big browns do this a lot. They'll come up and do this toilet flush to sink it, and then come back and eat it. The late great Jim Kern taught me when that happens, pull it in really fast and slap a split shot about that far above it and throw it right back in there. And they eat it every time. It's remarkable. So a sunken hopper, cool trick that I forgot when I put this together today. But don't wait for the terrestrial season. That fish was caught on June 23rd on a hopper that big. We just painted it black. I took a black magic marker and colored it up so it didn't look like a hopper anymore. It looked like a big beetle or a cricket. And there's something about black terrestrials. We all know this if you fish the creek, the crow beetle. Not only is it black, it rides really low. It doesn't have foam in it. It just has that deer hair pullover and a dubbed body, and it sits smack dab in the film. So my favorite patterns are low riding terrestrials in black for searching. Now, once the hoppers really get going, if you get one of those magical days where, yeah, they are eating the hopper, social media didn't ruin it, then just stick to your tan hopper. But I carry every terrestrial I either carry in black and kind of its standard tan, brown, whatever. Or if I haven't been able to find them like that, I just have a magic marker in my waders just black. I don't really go as far as doing all the little minute colors with stuff. But that was literally a chubby Chernobyl. The shop was out of the black one, so I just painted the bottom with a black marker. Low riding flies, kiss the bank. If you're at Silver Creek, Richie Thurston taught me this. When I was 20 years old, he invited me down to the Double R. And I learned several things all in one moment when he said, Brian, if you can get your beetle to kiss the bank right there, there's a 16-inch brown with a heron peck in its back. Well, I learned to kiss the bank, but I learned something that I talked about in the last talk I did for you guys, relationship fishing. When you regularly fish waters that flow less than 400 or 500 CFS, get to know individual fish. You'll learn a lot doing this. And big fish have very distinctive territories. They're the ones that you can memorize. And the spots on every trout are an absolute fingerprint. And once the guides around here really started catching on to this, now we share photos, and it's incredible. We're catching the same big fish over and over and over. And this whole keep them wet thing, yeah, be careful. But fish can breathe out of water. Every breath they take dries their gills exponentially more. So once they've done one or two of those, you've got to give them a head dunk. But you can literally watch the biologist when they're in. You can keep a trout alive for an hour going like that. So this whole offense to holding a fish out of the water for photos, most of the cutthroat on the Lost I get to hold at least 10 times in their lifetime. I'm not doing something wrong where they wouldn't still be there the next time we go. So you learn, we start handling enough fish, you catch them a lot. See how her hands are wet and the water dripping off that fish? That's what we're looking for in fish photos. Make sure you're dunking them constantly. I put at the bottom, do the drive-by. Brett Drummond taught me the drive-by. If you're on Silver Creek and it's an afternoon, there's usually not a lot of people in tubes in the afternoon on Silver Creek. It's hard to kiss the bank and have it stay this close to the bank on a pendulum type swing that our drifts are typically on. So when you hit that bank, lift up your feet, start floating and start creeping with it. Keep that fly as close to the bank as you can, as long as you can. And the guides call that the drive-by. Set up the cast. And with beginners, we might have to set it up 10 feet ahead of the fish because they're butchering the water. She's 13. She landed the biggest trout of my guide season this year on a dry. But we dropped her chubby right up here along the bank probably 10 times until she was almost touching the bank. And then, Ashley, feet up! And I just propel her down, and it was right below that willow where she got it. Huh. So just some little kind of tricks in regards to the terrestrial bugs. And also something I didn't put on there, if any of you haven't picked up on this, any homeowners or renters around here know this, watch about the last week of August, first week of September, the amber flying ant hatch. And you know what's happening when they start crawling out of the cracks of your foundation and all over, you'll see them all over houses inside the building. The back door at Silver Creek has had a nest of them for years, so we know when it's happening because you go 20 meters away and they're just crawling up the side of the building. So it's an amber flying ant that's about size 14, and it's dynamite in the fall here on all our waters. I'm just going to show a few of the flies that I've created over the years that I really had dynamite luck with. That's one of the ones that I just tie in that color, but I'll hit it with a magic marker for Silver Creek a lot. This one, you can find the fly tying video on YouTube as well as that one. This was a combined effort. Ron Fudge taught me the furled tail so the fish don't push it out of the way. Pete Wood came up with the hackle stacker, and I came up with putting the foam as your post for the hackle stacker so you get that added buoyancy. It stands out like a Vegas sign because of that combed over hackle stacker on top. And the fish don't push it out of the way because this body is so slender. And if you type God Damsel or Guide Damsel on YouTube or Fish and Let Live, there's a video of this one. And there's another one I didn't put up here. Pedro's Fat Gypsy. That's all I'm going to say. Ty, try it. I started this with a picture of me and my dad, and I wanted to end it with a picture of me and my dad. If it wasn't for him and my mom really encouraging me to be a fool and be a fishing nut as a kid, and, I don't know where I'd be today. I wasn't built to work in an office. That's just not the way my brain works. I have to be outside. And I was so fortunate. My mom took an inner tube and put webbing between it. And back then, when you had a kid, you were a mom now. You know, you didn't hire daycare and all this stuff. So the first few years of my life, my mom drugged me around behind her in a float tube while she fished the Hegerman ponds and places like that. And I think all of that really stuck in my head. And that was on my dad's birthday, I think 2 years ago, something like that, 2 or 3 years ago. Every year in September on his birthday, I give him the old, where do you want to fish? Well, he's getting older now and he can't really fish the rivers he'd like to fish. So a little added note that I actually added after I got here. This is the new toy to kind of open up. Silver Creek Outfitters has held 5 powerboat licenses for a long time now. One of them we just picked up, Mackey. But we have Mackey, Littlewood, Magic, Mormon, and Anderson. Nobody's ever really used them. A few of us will drop a 2.5 horse on the back of a drift boat and go putt around. But when I started guiding, I was 20. My guests were all in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. I'm now 47, and all those same guests, some of them are lucky enough to still be around. And those folks need any help they can get getting on the water. I've had some of the guides actually corner me and say, that's too much. You're spoiling people. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And I think it's why I've been able to keep a really loyal following of wonderful people that I just can't say enough about how fortunate I am to get to do what I do. This was kind of the next step in that evolution of my guiding. So any of you that know people, limited mobility, veterans, anybody that really wants to still be able to get out and enjoy it, but feels that the walk and wade guiding, and I know people that just plain hate float tubes, or just, that's not their idea of a good time. This has opened up some incredible stuff. I've already had it. Brendan and I broke it in on the first day on Alturas, but I spent the last 20 days of my guide season living off of that thing. And let me tell you, even if you think you're not into still water, wait till you experience what Mackey and Magic Reservoir have to offer at certain times around here. It is spectacular. And these fish we catch in the rivers, they're like, man, I got an 18-incher today. A day out on the boat, if you catch them under 18, like one of Brendan and I's days, we were making fun of each other because we were catching 16s. We're like, oh, little tiny fish. So it's a whole different game. And this thing's set up to be a power drifter, a skiff, so you can push pull it. And this year it will have sonar and trolling motor on it capabilities so that it's super versatile and we can do just about everything we want to do. So a little plug to my guiding with that at the end. And hopefully we can get some people out there that really need this kind of access and add some energy to my guiding after all these years. I didn't even watch the time to see how long we went, but are we good? Are there any questions that you guys have or comments, anything you want to share in regards to anything I said?
Do you fish that with just one guest, or can you do two?
Absolutely two. It's where you see it, the way they built these is to be convertible, and where you see the knee lock right here bar, I can put a pedestal seat there, and then this comes off. If we want to pop that off, it comes off with 6 bolts, just pop, 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 pop. And the way they fish these on the Rio Grande, they use these in Alaska and on the Rio Grande because they're made to hit every rock in the river. They're the largest piece of rotomolded plastic ever made in the world, skin foam, skin rotomolded plastic. Before this, the largest Yeti cooler was the largest rotomolded. So they love them in areas where you're really remote and you're running really rugged rivers, because when you punch holes in it, you just take a soldering iron and a polyethylene stick and you can patch it right in your driveway. You don't have to send it back for support or any help. And so what they also did with them, John St. John's, it's called a Hog Island skip, is he put these metal plates in here so that you can do all different things. I did all the seat upholstery and made all this stuff myself, but I've got several different seat options for the front, that seat option. If we pop that off, then I sit in the middle seat and row to move us around, while one angler stands. There's a big back deck behind this seat, or what's really fun, I put the ladies up on the throne. They just sit up there. And by having that elevation, and if you're really stable, the first day I guided off of it on Mackie, I realized the boat that most people were missing in the West by making fun of push-pulling platforms. I used to guide in the saltwater in Florida, and I got addicted to having one of those because of the visibility that you have. Without that, it's really hard to spot the tarpon and bonefish permit, and giving you that added altitude for push-pulling really helps. Well, over on Mackie Reservoir, the first day I guided off of it, we spent the entire day sight casting to rainbows from up there. So I had 2 young guys. The guy up here would spot some of them, but the guy up there could see them all. And so I just dropped the push pull and I rowed really quietly through these shallow estuary areas, and they were catching absurd. I mean, there's some wild rainbows in there. I can't believe how fast that place recovered from being drained. I don't really understand if those fish are moving up into Blake Quinn and Mark and Betsy's property into the spring creeks to survive when those events happen. But within a year after that, we were catching, not those ugly test tube babies that Fish and Game's putting in there that we need. We need them to stop that. It's really jeopardizing our wild fish health. But we were catching up to 24-inch wild rainbows. Bigger than I get when you go up in the east-west runs. That gets pounded by everybody. Those fish have learned where to be where they don't get picked on. And they just stay just out from the mouth in the reservoir, a lot of them, and you can spot them. It's insane. So it's been a really fun tool and added a new energy to my guiding and fishing. Good question. Anything else, guys?
Brian, what about blackstones? Those small blackstones in there.
I didn't mention that. Yeah, the winter stone, February stone that starts right now. Part of the reason I don't really mention it, I've known more guys that tied dozens of those and kept them in their box. But the nature of how they their life cycle, the females have wings, but the males don't. So the females have wings so that they can fly out over the water and lay their eggs. Have you ever seen a bunch of them on the water?
No, mostly in the snow. On the sides.
You just don't see them in the water. I tried fishing them for years and years, and when I was a kid, I ran into Pete Stevenson, ex-firefighter, builds rods, really nice guy.
Yeah.
My dad and I were fishing Stanton Crossing, and he saw me probably flailing with a tangle or something. He couldn't have been nicer. He came up and gave me a couple flies. Well, he had these beautiful CDC winter stones he tied. I kept one of those for years and fished it like crazy, and I caught a couple fish on it. But I think at the same time that you see those hatching, you're seeing such densities of midges that's just where the fish's focus goes. I've had very little luck fishing them. They're fun to talk about. And another one that if we had a year-round season on the Big Wood, we get a squall hatch on this river, but it's right when the season closes. And no one knows about it. I was sitting on the bank of the river one day with my friend's dogs, and I had squallows crawling all over me,
Really, yeah.
you know, and almost the size of a golden stone, a little shorter. But I saw fish rise into that because the spring runoff hadn't started yet. So if we could fish the Big Wood in April, we'd all be talking about squallows like they do on the Iwadi.
Yeah, I remember Mark Milkovich, we were talking about those squalls on Big Wood. I go, really? Those? Yeah.
Once in a blue moon,
Yeah.
the last week of March,